Hello everybody and welcome back. In the previous video we talked about the British Raj and what is possibly entailed for it in the new coming up DLC, Graveyard of Empires. This video I'd like to talk about the other three countries that will be receiving an update. Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. Now these three nations, unlike the British Raj, currently have no content. They all three have the basic tree, they all three start out as non-aligned, and there's not much going on with them. There is a little bit because there is the United Kingdom does have a national focus on their historical mode that allows them to secure the, I believe it's not global defense, it's home defense, where they would be able to go to war with the secure Iraq and secure Iran. There we are, where they can invade Iraq because Iraq had a fascist coup, I believe, during the war, which led to the British invasion, and then there was the joint Soviet-British occupation of Iran. So there is a little bit of content in this region, but there's not much. So this DLC will, as it is, going to be all about improving this region. So I'd like to discuss possible things we could see in this coming DLC. To start out with, I'd like to discuss some things that could possibly change but are not related to the other three nations. So this would be things that might affect other nations in this region, or just general purpose things that aren't unique to these three focus trees. Because in the past few DLCs we've seen things like with Luxembourg where, while they didn't get a focus tree or anything with Gotterdammerung, they did get some election events, some unique leaders, an achievement, etc. Same thing happened with Bolivia. It got a little bit of content. While it didn't get a focus tree, it still has the base tree. It did receive a little bit. Same, Venezuela has its port blockade feature, as well as like the option to try to take these islands and such. They're minor things, but they are slight differences than they used to be, so I'd like to go into what we could see in this region. So with the last DLC, they did, it believes they've changed the name of Oman to the Sultanate of Muscat and Oman. They also did this by changing Albania to the Albanian Kingdom, and they changed the Siam to the Kingdom of Siam. They may have changed Mongolia. I cannot remember if it was that way before, or if it was just Mongolia, or if it was always Mongolian People's Republic. I'm not sure, but likely we could possibly see some slight events for Yemen, for Oman, for Saudi Arabia, and such, and possibly some unique leaders for maybe Kuwait, for Qatar, the UAE, stuff like that. It'll be very minor, but we could probably see a few portraits, maybe a few decisions these nations could have, just maybe unique events or achievements related to them. Nothing much. But something I am hoping, and is possible, is that we would get a Formable in this region of Greater Syria, or which could possibly then also incorporate Iraq, or Assyria instead of Greater Syria, because the Assyrian Empire used to rule this region back in the day. That'd be a cool kind of Formable with Iraq, parts of Syria, Jordan, maybe parts of Saudi Arabia. Give it a little bit, give like places like Jordan or Syria things to do, while not necessarily giving them a lot of content. Because during the First World War, there was the Great Arab Revolt. Most of this region, besides like Central Arabia and like the southern part, were all ruled by the Ottoman Empire. And during the Arabian Uprising, there was a promise by Britain to create a greater Syrian kingdom in this region. And actually, it was supposed to be ruled by, I believe, this dynasty, the Hashemite dynasty. I believe during this time there was the leader of Jordan was also part of that dynasty. So there was supposed to be like this dynastic tie to the region to make a strong ally, but it was ultimately not gone through because there was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which split up the region and such. So we could possibly see a cool Formable in this region that would give some of these releasables at least some content, if not much. Moving on to the first thing that I believe will definitely be changed is a rework to the formable nation of Arabia. Currently, to form Arabia, you need to have all of Spanish Africa, all of Iraq, all of Saudi Arabia, all of Italian states in North Africa, all of French states in North Africa and the Middle East, and all British states in Egypt, the Middle East, and Arabia. That's a lot of territory you have to get as a independent, either North African or Central Arabian Peninsula nation. I've done it before, but it's just not very fun a lot of the times because you start out so weak, and you honestly can't really gain that much power that quickly. Not to mention the fact you have to face both the Axis and the Allies on historical because you need all of this land. So it just can be a real slog. So hopefully they change it where, like they have with many of the other formables, where they split it up into multiple decisions. At first, I believed possibly just have it where you need to control the 4 independent Arabian Peninsula states. The problem is that most likely Iraq, possibly Yemen and Oman. I'm not sure about Yemen, but I believe Oman and Iraq were for sure part of the British Empire at this time, in some capacity, whether they were puppet states or just independent but associated with it, so they'd be part of the Allies. So, can't really do that. The least amount of effort Paradox would have to do would be to make it where you need to control the entire Arabian Peninsula for the first decision, and then have a second decision where it would be for Northern Africa. That would be the easiest solution they could do, and I think possibly the one they will go with, because honestly the problem with the Arabian Formable is that almost every bit of territory has already been colonized by a great power, which will lead you to a war with at least one of the major two of the major factions, the Axis or the Allies. I mean, you can possibly get away with killing France before they join the Allies with paratrooper strats, and maybe you can take Italy before they join the Axis, but it's realistically very hard. So usually you are fighting both factions at once, occupying huge swaths of land, and then finally getting the Formable, and that's it. That was your goal, because usually by the time you get the Formable done, you're probably not finishing the war, because the United States has probably already joined the Allies. Germany's already thundering through to the Urals. It's a whole headache that, quite frankly, isn't the most fun. And at least making it where, like, if you conquer the Arabian Peninsula, you can core that. It'll give you enough power to get through North Africa. Like, it at least will make it more enjoyable. Possibly another way they could do it, which I believe would be better, would be to have it where Saudi Arabia and everything south, so pretty much this section would be a entire expansion. The north would be its own, Egypt possibly its own, then maybe Italy, and then also northern France and Spain would all be a different one, split up into 4 or 5 different decisions. That could be done, and I believe that would be better, but I'm not sure if they're going to do it that way, because at that point you can arbitrarily just decide it can have 7 decisions or 9. Like, it's just a lot. I'm not sure how far they're going to split this up as a formable. Hopefully they make it more accessible so you can do so a lot of these minor nations who aren't necessarily getting content will be able to take advantage of it, but we shall see. Now, the second formable nation rework that I want to talk about is the Persian Empire. So I've done the Persian Empire one time, and it was a very brutal run that took me forever to get accomplished, because while Iran isn't in the worst starting spot, and you can take Afghanistan and Iraq fairly easily, as I mentioned before, Iraq probably will no longer be an easy take. So it's going to make early game Iran even weaker. Granted, it will have a focus tree, which possibly can let you just annex all of it, and so a lot of that issue probably won't be super important anymore, because it will have a focus tree, and the only 2 nations I believe that can form it are Afghanistan and Iran, which both will have a focus tree. So it probably won't be as bad as it is currently, just on that regard alone. But the changes I would like to see to it is to not need... Pretty much every complaint with a lot of these massable formables is that they just need so much territory. Like this one, you need to control all of Turkey, all of pretty much all of northern Arabia. Let's see. Yeah, you need all of Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Turkey, French Syria, Italia. You need all Italian states in North Africa and the Dodecanese. You don't even get. I don't even believe you get cores on all of those. Oh, you do. You do. Okay, that's not as bad. Because it shows up like I thought you only got cores on these two, but no, you get cores on the rest. That's not so bad. But you still need it. Like you need pretty much everything for Arabia, except for this parts. But instead of this parts, you need Turkey. You also need Cyprus, which was the problem I had. Was I conquered everything. I was occupying it, but I could not get cores on everything until I built up an air force, got paratroopers so I could land over here. Because as I ran, you're not going to get a navy, and then make it strong enough usually to invade the into the Mediterranean. Especially because you're going to be fighting Italy too. You're going to be fighting both factions. It's just so hopefully they shorten it to where maybe you only need Iran, Afghanistan, and Iraq to form it. Like it'll give you a core on Kuwait. Then there'll be like a decision to integrate Turkey, then the Levant, then like Egypt and Syria, not Syria, Libya, and such. Not sure where they want to go with it, but because again, both nations that can form this formable are getting a focus tree, so the extent that this formable is needed can be lessened depending on how the focus paths work. They could remove it altogether for some paths, which I hope they don't, because I really don't care for when they remove those kind of paths. When like such, with the last DLC, they removed forming Benelux as Belgium, which while Belgium can form like the EU and Belgica and stuff and get the cores on this area, it's just it limits paths because there's no point to do like with this tree. There's besides the achievement, there is really no reason to go for support the Rexist. You always want to go for support the V and V, and I just dislike when they do that kind of stuff because it makes some paths not fun, and I'm afraid they'll do that with this formable. Because that they'll remove it and lock it to just a Persian path. I really hope they don't do that. I hope they leave it where you can do it as most paths. It's okay if they lock it to one path or two. They lock out those paths if they give those equivalent things. But that's really the biggest problem is a lot of times they don't give equivalency. Even when the paths aren't bad, like such with Italy. The socialist, like democracy and the communist paths, they don't get access to Rome or Greater Italy, which automatically, like, yeah, you can do some stuff with them, but they're not as fun to play for that regard. The only advantage democracy has is that it could make the European Union, which you can go democracy in this pass and still go Rome, so it completely negates almost any benefit this one has, just for the fact it doesn't have access to this focus right here. And it does have some things, but that's the problem is when they lock it like that, it makes it very hard for trees to compete because then it makes trees direct comparisons of each other. So hopefully they just rework it where they make it easier with more decisions and not just outright lock it to a certain path. But we will have to see because I am not sure with how they're going to go with that way. Now, for a final couple things I want to talk about before we move on to speculating about the focus trees is the possibility of a new formable nation in this region I talked about in the last video, the Mughal Empire that Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India would have access to, which would split Iran and Afghanistan apart more, because right now, as we showed, the Persian Empire is accessible to both. So it realistically never gave a reason to play Afghanistan. So giving Afghanistan this formable would at least give it a more unique identity from Iran. The next thing I would like to talk about is they could potentially do something with Kurdistan, because as you can see, Kurdistan has cores on many of this region, and it already does have a achievement in the game. So it's a possibility that we could get something with a Kurdish path, maybe with like a Kurdish revolt or something. I'm not sure what they would do with it, where like maybe the Kurds would get put in control of one of these nations and form a greater Kurdish state or something. I'm not sure what they would do with it, but I'd like to throw out there that that is a possibility that could happen in this regard, and it could be interesting because we have shown like the Kurdistan stuff can be kind of fun when you play as when you do the Democratic Greece path with like the Gordian knot and such, and then invade Turkey, and France sets up a Kurdish puppet in the region. So it could be there could be something interesting they do with the Kurdish nation, but we most likely will not see much from it. There is also the possibility they could do what they did with Ethiopia, miners where they gave this small tree. They could do that and give it to like Kurdistan, like Kuwait, maybe some of these just so they'd have something. That I believe that's highly unlikely, but I did want to throw out it as a possibility because you never know what they will do with this. Because we've not seen what they're going to want to do with this region, as it's fairly well a blank slate. So we'll see what they're going for moving forward. Alright, before we move on to discussing the possibilities for the focus trees of these three nations, if you could, please like, comment, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it if you would. And let's move on to, let's go with Afghanistan first. So Afghanistan, starting out, back in the day, there was the great game between the British Empire and the Russian Empire. That's kind of why like this little strip right here exists currently and such. So for Afghanistan, I think something interesting would be a path that possibly gives them access to the Turkestan decisions to unite all the Stan nations up here, as well as in Sinkiang can also form it. So maybe giving Afghanistan access to that, maybe also letting it integrate parts of Pakistan. That probably would be the most interesting thing that Afghanistan could do for its path. It also probably could have access to a Persian path, but I feel like they would want to more put that on Iran than Afghanistan. So I think the like a Turkestan path would probably be very interesting for Afghanistan. It also makes it better because the only nation realistically currently that can do it is Sinkiang, which, while forming China and Turkestan is very fun, that's kind of its own thing. It's very different than just forming Turkestan. So giving a smaller country like Afghanistan access to it, I think that would make it very powerful and a lot more intrigue in the region. Next, let's talk about some things that Iran could get. So now Iran's very interesting because most likely we are going to get a Persian path for sure. Now, I'm not sure where it would be integrated, whether it's going to be its own thing or if it'll be like part of the monarchist path or maybe a communist or a fascist path. I'm not sure what they'll do with that, but I do believe that will most likely be in the focus tree. Now, another thing that would be very interesting is it's probably going to have a decent communist path because the Soviet Union did do a joint invasion with the British into Iran during the war, and it did temporarily set up a communist state. So I believe there's definitely, and not to mention it borders the Soviet Union, so there's definitely something they might do with a communist path. And I'm not sure what they would do with a fascist path, because like that might just be the Persian Empire path. It seems on theme. Now they definitely could do a cool monarchist path, because I believe this is the Shah of Iran. I believe that was the title. I'm not sure on that. But they do have a monarchy at this time, so there's definitely something they could do with that. Also, something with like an Islamic state or like a caliphate of some kind. There's a few interesting possibilities they could do, but I'm not sure completely, because while there is intrigue, realistically you're going to have to expand into your neighbors, and you have the British Empire on one side and the Soviet Union on another. And even with like neutral countries like Turkey, they get guaranteed by the Axis and the Allies. So like you're going to have either the focus tree be very powerful to be able to circumvent these things, or it'll be hemmed in. I'm not sure how they want to go with that. Moving on to the final nation, Iraq. Now, Iraq is going to be interesting because it most likely, as I said earlier, is going to be more tied into the British Empire than it currently is. So possibly breaking away or upping your status is going to be a more central part to Iraq versus Iran and Afghanistan. Currently, there is already a nationalize the oil decision, so there's a possibility that nationalizing the oil and either preventing the coup or supporting the Golden Square coup in Iraq will be a central part of the tree, and then fending off the British invasion as a result. I'm not sure how much of the tree that's going to take, or if they're going to maybe focus more on like an Arabia tree, or as I mentioned earlier, a possible Syria slash Assyria intrigue. There's a multitude of things that could happen with Iraq that will be interesting, but it depends on how integrated into the British Empire they make it, how historical they want to go, or if they're going to play it more fast and loose. It'll be interesting to see what they'll do with that, but I believe that's all I wanted to talk about for the past, because we can speculate on more, but I believe at this point, this is the best I'm going to get until they start releasing some information, some teasers. Maybe we'll go over those later and see if any of my predictions were correct or if I was completely off base. We'll have to see, but I'll see you guys in the next one.